Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
There's a moment, and I think you know exactly the one I mean, where you're sitting in your favorite chair, maybe with a cup of tea that's gone a little cold, and the house is quiet around you, and something inside you whispers, "Is this it?" Not in a dramatic way, not like a crisis, more like a small, tired question that you've been politely ignoring for years. A question that surfaces when the grandchildren go home, when the dinner dishes are done, when the TV is on, but you're not really watching it. It surfaces in the space between one ordinary moment and the next. And you push it back down, because you're good at that. Because you've been pushing things down since you were 22, and somebody told you that being strong meant not asking for too much. Here's what nobody tells you about comfort. It doesn't always feel like luxury. Sometimes comfort feels like a very well-decorated prison. The walls are familiar. The routines are predictable. And you've arranged everything, your days, your relationships, your carefully managed expectations, so that nothing can surprise you, nothing can shake you, nothing can hurt you, and nothing can reach you either. I've talked to so many women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, brilliant, warm, deeply alive women who describe their lives using words like fine and okay and I can't complain. And what I hear underneath those words is something they won't quite say out loud. I stopped trying. I don't remember when. But somewhere along the way, I just stopped. Maybe it was after the divorce. Maybe it was after the kids left and the silence in the house felt like accusation. Maybe it was after the health scare that reminded you, viscerally, undeniably, that time isn't a river with no end. Maybe it was just the slow accumulation of 1,000 small moments where you chose the safe answer, the sensible path, the option that wouldn't upset anyone. And now here you are, not broken, not desperate, but carrying something. A weight we don't always have a name for. A kind of unspoken grief for the version of yourself you never quite let out of the room. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think we rush past it too quickly. We go straight to the solutions, the action plans, the positive affirmations, and we skip right over the ache. But the ache is where the truth lies. The ache is the part of you that hasn't given up, that's still pointing towards something, that's still quietly, wildly hoping. So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually let yourself feel this, not just think it. When is the last time you did something that genuinely frightened you? Not terrified you, not endangered you, but made your hands a little unsteady, made your heart do that fluttery thing, made you feel, even briefly, alive in a way that comfort never quite manages to do. For some of you, it's been a very long time, and I understand why. The older we get, the more we've lost. Friendships, parents, chances, versions of ourselves we loved. And grief makes us cautious. Grief teaches us, in the most visceral way possible, that caring too much, wanting too much, means there's more to lose. So we build our sanctuary. We make it beautiful, we make it safe. And then we make it smaller and smaller, until the sanctuary becomes a room, and the room becomes a corner. And the corner becomes the very specific shape of our own fear, dressed up to look like contentment. Here's what I know. After years of sitting across from women who were braver than they believed themselves to be, comfort isn't the opposite of pain. Courage is. And courage, real courage, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself on social media or require an audience, doesn't live on the other side of the fear. It lives right in the middle of it. It's the decision you make when your hands are shaking. It's the conversation you have when you don't know how it will end. It's the door you open even though you haven't been outside in longer than you'd like to admit. That door is what we're going to talk about. But first, you have to feel where you are right now. And right now, you're not stuck. You're resting at the edge of something. You know what the mind is extraordinary at? Justifying stillness, not laziness. I want to be clear about that. Because the women I'm thinking of right now are not lazy. They raised families and built careers and held households together with sheer, well, during years when nobody was asking if they were okay. They are not lazy. They are practiced. Practiced at finding the perfectly reasonable explanation for why now is not the right time. Why this particular dream doesn't make sense at this particular stage of life. Why wanting something different, something more, something theirs, is somehow selfish. We are masterful storytellers, every single one of us. And the most convincing stories we ever tell are the ones we tell ourselves in the dark. Here's one I've heard 1,000 times, in 1,000 different voices. It's too late for me. Sometimes it's whispered almost apologetically, like the woman is embarrassed to even say it out loud. Sometimes it arrives dressed in practicality. At my age, it just doesn't make sense to start over. Sometimes it hides behind other people. I couldn't do that to my family. Or it wears the costume of wisdom. I've made my peace with it. I'm realistic now. Realistic. That word, that quiet, suffocating word. When did realism become the virtue we reach for when we've abandoned hope? When did making peace become indistinguishable from giving up? I want to tell you about something that psychologists call the stories of foreclosure. It's when we close the book on a chapter of our life, not because the story is actually finished, but because we've convinced ourselves we already know how it ends. We write the final page in our heads before we've lived it. And then we spend years, sometimes decades, acting as though that imagined ending is fact. I already know it won't work out. I already know what people will say. I already know I'll fail. But here's the unspoken truth underneath all of those sentences. I already know I'll be hurt, and we've been hurt before, deeply, in ways that left marks that never fully disappeared. So the foreclosure isn't really about the future. It's about protecting the wounds of the past. And that protection made sense once? It really did. When you were 38 and your marriage was falling apart, and you had 2 kids depending on you and no safety net. Pulling in, protecting yourself. Building walls, that was survival. That was wisdom. That was mothering yourself when nobody else was going to do it. But you're not 38 anymore. And the wall that saved you then is the wall that's separating you from the rest of your own life now. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this, and it's different from the loneliness of being alone. You can be surrounded by people who love you and still feel it. It's the loneliness of being unknown, of having an interior life so rich and so private that it's become almost entirely interior, of having opinions and dreams and wild ideas and a sense of humor that could light up a room, and keeping most of it carefully managed, carefully rationed, carefully contained so that nobody is alarmed or overwhelmed or inconvenienced by the full, unedited version of you. When did you start editing yourself? I mean, really. When was the first time you swallowed what you actually wanted to say and replaced it with something safer? Something smaller? Something that would keep the peace? Most women I ask can't pinpoint the exact moment. It happened gradually. Like the slow dimming of a light, so incremental you don't notice until the room is considerably darker than it used to be. You look around one day and think, when did it get so dim in here? And you've forgotten that you were the one who kept turning the dial. Here's where the psychology gets both uncomfortable and tremendously freeing at the same time. The stories we tell ourselves aren't just idle thoughts. They are operating instructions. They are the software running quietly in the background of every decision you make, every risk you don't take. Every morning you wake up and choose the known over the unknown. The brain is not trying to torment you with these stories. It's trying to protect you. The brain's first and most passionate priority, above happiness, above growth, above fulfillment, is survival. And survival, to the nervous system, looks a lot like sameness, same routines, same relationships, same size life, same. Because same has a track record. Same didn't kill you. And that to the ancient fear-driven part of your brain is an extraordinary endorsement. But you are not just a nervous system. You are a woman who has outlasted things that should have broken you. Who has sat with grief that had no bottom and found, somehow, a foothold? Who has loved people imperfectly and been loved imperfectly back and kept showing up anyway? Who knows, in the deepest, quietest part of herself, that there is more, that she is more, that the story isn't finished, even when it feels like all the exciting chapters are behind her. The exciting chapters are not behind you. They're waiting on the other side of the story you keep telling yourself about why you can't. And this is where something important shifts, because recognizing the story isn't enough. Plenty of people recognize their patterns and stay perfectly imprisoned by them anyway. Understanding your cage doesn't automatically open the door. What opens the door is something older than analysis, older than self-awareness, older than every self-help book ever written. It's a very quiet, very stubborn kind of courage, not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself, the kind that shows up on an ordinary Tuesday when you're tired and a little afraid and you do the thing anyway. That's the kind we're going to talk about next. I want to tell you about a woman named Carol. She's not a case study. She's not a composite. She's a real woman, the kind you might recognize because she reminds you uncomfortably of yourself. Carol was 63 when she came to see me. Retired school teacher, widowed 4 years prior, 3 grown children who called on Sundays and visited on holidays and loved her in the distracted, well-meaning way that busy people love the people they've always assumed would simply be there. She had a beautiful home, a garden she tended with genuine devotion, friends she lunched with every other week. By every external measurement, Carol was doing beautifully. But Carol hadn't slept well in 4 years. Not since Gerald died. And it wasn't the grief keeping her awake, or not only the grief. It was something she described in our 3rd session, haltingly, with the particular shame of someone confessing something they believe they have no right to feel. "I keep thinking," she said, "about the painting classes I gave up when we got married. Gerald wasn't interested, and it felt frivolous. And then the kids came, and then the years came, and I keep dreaming about paint, actual paint, colors. And I wake up, and I feel ridiculous because I'm 63 years old, and my husband is gone, and what kind of person lies awake mourning a hobby?" She looked at me like she expected me to reassure her that she wasn't ridiculous. I didn't. Instead, I said, "Carol, I don't think you're mourning a hobby. I think you're mourning a self." And she went very still. Because that was the thing she hadn't been able to say out loud. That it wasn't just Gerald she'd lost. It was the last external reason she'd been using for 40 years to explain why she wasn't living more fully. Why she wasn't taking up more space. Why she wasn't picking up the brush. Gerald's absence hadn't liberated her the way she'd secretly, guiltily half expected it might. It had just removed the explanation. And without the explanation, she was left alone with the actual reason, which was fear. Pure, old, deeply personal fear. Not a failure exactly. Not of what people would think, but of something more tender than that. The fear of discovering, at 63, that she was still capable of wanting things. That desire hadn't died with her youth, or her marriage, or her career. That somewhere inside this practical, composed, carefully managed woman, there was still a girl who wanted to make something beautiful. And that girl was exhausted from being ignored. That's the turning point. Right there. Not the dramatic moment. Not the lightning bolt. Not the rock bottom that the movies love so much. The turning point is almost always quieter than we expect. It's a moment you stop arguing with what you know to be true. The moment the gap between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are becomes too wide and too exhausting to keep maintaining. It's the moment you get tired of being reasonable about your own life. And something I've learned, something that took me years of sitting with people in their most honest moments to understand. is that the turning point almost never arrives as joy. It arrives as grief first, as an ache, as that low, persistent hum of something unfinished that you've been mishearing as dissatisfaction for so long you forgot. It's actually just longing. Longing is not a character flaw. Longing is the soul's navigation system. It's pointing somewhere. And when we spend decades overriding it in the name of practicality, responsibility, or the comfort of other people, it doesn't disappear. It goes underground. And underground, longing has a way of reshaping itself into other things. Resentment, numbness, a bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep fully cures, a vague irritability you can't quite source, a sense that everyone around you is living slightly more in color than you are. Does any of that feel familiar? Because if it does, if you're reading this and something in your chest is recognizing itself, I want you to hear this very clearly. That recognition is the turning point. You don't have to be ready. You don't have to have a plan. You don't have to know what comes next or have it figured out or be certain it will work. The turning point doesn't require certainty. It only requires honesty. The radical, uncomfortable, quietly revolutionary act of admitting to yourself that you want more than this. That you are more than this. That the careful, contained, perfectly reasonable life you've constructed, however genuinely lovely parts of it are, is not the whole story of who you are. Carol signed up for painting classes 3 weeks after that session. Not because I told her to. Not because she suddenly felt brave or ready or free of fear. She signed up because she was tired. Tired of the dream about colors waking her up at 3 a.m. Tired of driving past the art supply store and feeling that small, swift pang of recognition. Tired of choosing the same safe answer to the question her own soul kept asking. She called me after the first class. She was laughing, this surprised, almost embarrassed laugh, and she said, I was terrible. Absolutely terrible. My sunflower looked like a confused potato. And I haven't felt that alive and I don't know how long. Terrible at something and alive. That's the trade. That's the actual trade that courage offers us, not the guarantee of success. Not the promise that it will be graceful or impressive, or that anyone else will understand why you're suddenly taking ceramics at 67 or training for a 5K at 70. One, or finally saying the thing you've been swallowing for 20 years. Courage doesn't promise any of that. It only promises this, that you will be present for your own life in a way that comfort, for all its warmth and familiarity, simply cannot deliver. Because here's what comfort actually costs us, and we rarely say this plainly enough: comfort costs us our aliveness. Not all at once. Gradually. The way a muscle you stop using slowly loses its memory of what it was built to do. The way a voice that never sings eventually forgets the melody. The way a woman who stops reaching for connection, for growth, for the specific and irreplaceable thrill of attempting something that matters to her, eventually stops feeling the impulse to reach at all. And that right there is the loss I think we should be far more afraid of than failure. Another painting class that produces a confused potato. The life that never tried. Carol still paints. She's still not particularly good by any technical measure, and she will tell you that herself, cheerfully, without a shred of apology. But her garden has gotten more colorful. She laughs more easily. She sleeps through the night. She started a small group, other women her age, meeting monthly, making things badly and joyfully together in someone's garage. She didn't change her whole life. She just stopped leaving herself out of it. And that, as small and ordinary as it sounds, is the entire revolution. I want to stay with you here for a little while longer, because this is the part where most conversations about courage veer off into territory that feels, and I say this with genuine tenderness, a little hollow. The rousing finish, the motivational crescendo. The list of action steps delivered with the energetic confidence of someone who has never actually sat inside the particular silence of a life that feels slightly too small. I'm not going to do that to you. because you didn't come here for a pep talk. You came here because something in you is tired of being talked at and is hungry, genuinely hungry, to be understood. To have someone name the thing you've been carrying without making you feel broken for carrying it. To hear from another human voice that the quiet ache you've been living alongside isn't a symptom of weakness or ingratitude or depression. It's the sound of your own life asking to be more fully lived. And that is not a small thing. That is not a problem to be solved with a checklist and a motivational quote pinned above your bathroom mirror. That is an invitation, a genuine, specific, deeply personal invitation that only you can answer. And only you can answer it in the way that belongs to your particular life, your particular history, your particular brand of brave. So let's talk about what courage actually looks like at this stage of life. Because I think we've been sold a version of it that doesn't fit us anymore. The version that requires grand gestures and public declarations and the kind of dramatic reinvention that makes for a compelling magazine profile, but bears almost no resemblance to how real change actually moves through a real woman's real life. Real courage at 50, 5 or 60, 3 or 71 is almost always intimate. It's the phone call you've been putting off for 2 years. To the friend you hurt, or who hurt you, because you've both been waiting for the other one to go first, and meanwhile the distance has grown into something that aches on quiet Sunday mornings when you remember how she used to make you laugh until your sides hurt. It's signing up for the thing, the class, the trip, the group, the lesson, and not telling anyone first, so that no one's expectations become another reason to back out. It's saying out loud to someone who loves you, I'm not happy with how things are, and I need something to change. Not as an accusation, not as a crisis. Just as a truth that deserves to be spoken in your own voice instead of whispered only in the privacy of your own mind. It's choosing, on an ordinary morning, to spend 45 minutes doing something that is entirely and unapologetically for you. Not productive, not useful to anyone else, not justifiable on any grounds other than it feeds something in you that has been quietly underfed for a very long time. It's letting people see you try. That last one is harder than it sounds. Because somewhere along the way, many of us made a quiet agreement with the world. I will be competent. I will be reliable. I will be the one who holds it together. I will not need things publicly or want things embarrassingly or attempt things that might make me look foolish or lost or uncertain. I will have it handled. And that agreement, however understandable its origins, has cost us the permission to be in process, to be learning, to be genuinely, visibly, unashamedly in the middle of becoming something we haven't fully become yet. You are allowed to be in the middle of becoming. At 68, at 74, at any age that ends in a number. There is a poet, Mary Oliver, whose words I return to again and again, because she understood something about time and wildness and the particular grief of a life half lived that I have never seen expressed more precisely. She asked, in that quiet, devastating way of hers, what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. I think about that question differently now than I did when I first encountered it in my 30s. In my 30s, it felt like a challenge, a call to ambition, a starting gun. Now I hear it as something more tender, more urgent in a different way. Not what will you build or what will you achieve, but what will you inhabit? What will you actually show up for fully, with your whole complicated self present in the room? What moments will you stop half, attending to from behind the comfortable glass wall of your routines and your carefully managed expectations? What will you let matter to you, even knowing that things which matter can be lost? Because that's the real ask. That's the courage underneath the courage. Not just the doing of the new thing, the class, the conversation, the trip taken alone for the first time, the boundary finally spoken. But the willingness to care again, to invest again, to let yourself want something enough that losing it would hurt, because you have already learned, in the most intimate possible way, that things can be lost, and you're considering wanting anyway. That is extraordinary. I need you to hear that. Not as flattery, not as the warm, empty encouragement that gets dispensed by the handful on the internet, but as an actual observation from someone who has spent years sitting across from human beings in their most honest moments. The willingness to remain open to life after significant loss, after the particular wariness of decades, after the accumulation of all the small surrenders we've made along the way. That is not ordinary. That is one of the bravest things a person can do. So here is what I want to leave you with. Not a list, not a plan. Something simpler and harder and more lasting than either of those things. One door. That's all. Not a new life. Not a dramatic reinvention. Not a vision board or a 5-year plan or a complete overhaul of everything that isn't working. Just one door, the one that's been standing there in your peripheral vision for longer than you want to admit. The one you walk past and then look away from a little too deliberately. The one that has your name on it in handwriting you recognize as your own. You don't have to throw it open. You don't have to stride through with confidence and a clear plan. You can open it a crack. You can stand in the doorway for a while with your heart going a little faster than usual. You can take one uncertain, imperfect, completely human step across the threshold, and then another, and then another. Carol painted a confused potato and it changed her life. Not because the potato was significant, because the reaching was. Because the act of moving towards something she wanted, clumsily, nervously, without any guarantee of grace, reminded her nervous system that it was still capable of moving toward things, that the impulse hadn't died, that she was still, underneath all the years and losses and careful management of expectations, a woman who wanted to make something beautiful. You are still that woman too. The one who wanted things before the world taught her to want less. The one who had opinions before she learned to smooth them into something more comfortable for everyone else. The one who felt things in full, vivid, inconvenient color before she trained herself into something more manageable. She didn't go anywhere. She's been sitting in your favorite chair, with the tea that's gone a little cold, waiting for you to stop being so reasonable about everything. Waiting for you to let her back into the room. That's all this is. That's the whole of it. Courage isn't some foreign country you have to earn your way into. It's not reserved for the young or the unafraid or the people who seem to move through the world with an ease you've never quite felt. Courage is just the decision, made in an ordinary moment with ordinary fear, in the middle of your one irreplaceable life, to stop leaving yourself out of it. The chair is yours. The life is yours. The door is right there. Open it.